The snow was falling hard in Denver that night. Thick flakes drifting down onto the glowing rooftops of my neighborhood. Christmas lights twinkled across the street, red and green reflections bouncing off the icy pavement. From my kitchen window, I had the perfect view of my son's driveway, though what I saw there nearly knocked the air out of me. Daniel stood proudly in his long black coat, grinning ear to ear. Beside him, his wife Clara clapped her hands and squealed like a child. And in front of them, with a giant red bow across its hood, sat a brand new Audi. Sleek. Silver. The kind of car that cost more than I'd made in my last 5 years as a nurse before I retired. Merry Christmas. Mom, Margaret, Daniel shouted. Holding out the keys, like head, just performed a miracle. Clara's mother, Margaret, gasped in delight and pressed her manicured hands to her face. Daniel, you shouldn't have. But of course, he had. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. My son, my only child, had just handed a $60,000 car to a woman who had been in our lives less than a year. And me? What had I received? A card. A flimsy card with 5 crisp $1 bills tucked inside. When I opened it earlier that evening, Daniel had smiled with that tone-deaf pride of his. It's symbolic. Mom, you always taught me to save money, so we thought this was the perfect gift. $5. $5 after 36 years of raising him, of working double shifts in the ER so he could go to college, of using my late husband's pension to help him with his down payment, of standing alone at his wedding reception after cooking half the food myself. I smiled when I opened it, of course, because that's what mothers do. We smile while our hearts crumble, pretending scraps are enough, pretending that we're not being shoved into the corner while someone else takes our place. From outside, I could hear Clara squealing again. Oh my God. Daniel. She looks so happy. Look at the leather seats. Mom. Look at the dash. The word mom sliced through me. Clara always called her mother Mom. But the way Daniel echoed it, Mom, Margaret, made me want to scream. I leaned against the window frame and pressed the piggy bank they'd stuffed my $5 into against my chest. The cheap plastic rattled with the sound of coins and bills, hollow and pathetic. Out there, under the glow of Christmas lights, Margaret slid behind the wheel of her new Audi, her silver hair shining, while my son bowed like a knight presenting a crown. Inside, my kitchen smelled of roasted ham, buttered rolls, and green bean casserole. My feet ached. My back burned, but the ache in my chest drowned it all out. I whispered to the empty room. So this is what 36 years of sacrifice amounts to $5. And I knew in that moment, something inside me had shifted. The house fell silent after the car pulled away, its engine purring down the snowy street. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the mountain of dirty dishes piled high, the leftover ham cooling on the counter, and the flickering Christmas lights reflecting in the window like a cruel joke. That was when I noticed it sitting neatly on the end of the counter, right next to the piggy bank, holding my $5 pathetic dollars. Margaret's handbag. It was black leather, structured and glossy, with a gold clasp and a designer label I recognized from the glossy pages of fashion magazines. A bag like that could pay my utilities for 2 months. She must have set it down in her excitement over her shiny new Audi and forgotten to take it with her. I picked it up. Heavy. Too heavy for just makeup and a wallet. My first instinct was to put it by the door so she could collect it later, but something gnawed at me. A woman like Margaret didn't forget things. She had swept into our family after my husband's funeral like she owned the place. Always polished. Always composed. Always calculating. Still, I told myself, I was just being a responsible host, making sure nothing inside was misplaced. That's all. I opened the clasp. Inside was a wallet thick with cash, nearly $400 in crisp bills. several platinum credit cards, store cards for luxury retailers. But that wasn't what made my stomach knot. Folded neatly behind her driver's license were 3 investment statements, printed just last week, each one stamped with the logo of a firm called Mountain Crest Holdings. The balances had more zeros than I'd seen since my husband's life insurance payout. She wasn't just comfortable, she was loaded. And tucked between those papers was something that froze me in place. A copy of Daniel's mortgage documents. How in the world did Margaret have those? Clara hadn't mentioned refinancing. Yet here were the papers, highlighted and annotated like a project under review. At the bottom of the bag, I spotted a prescription bottle. Anxiety medication. Prescribed only 2 months ago. Around the same time, she started inserting herself into our family's finances, helping me check my insurance policy, reviewing my pension plan, offering to drive me to appointments. My pulse quickened as I realized this wasn't kindness. This was access. The snow tapped softly against the window as I carefully spread everything out on my bedroom dresser. My hands trembled as I looked at the mortgage forms, the statements, the pills, the fat wallet. It was like holding pieces of a puzzle that hinted at a much larger picture. And for the first time, I wondered if Margaret hadn't just forgotten her purse at all. Maybe she'd left it there on purpose. I was still staring at the documents laid out across my dresser when the phone rang. The sharp sound jolted me, echoing through the quiet house. I hesitated before answering, my fingers trembling as I lifted the receiver. Mrs. Conted. Hayes, this is Officer Miller with the Denver Police Department. His tone was firm, professional. We're following up on a missing person report. A woman named Margaret Chen was last seen at your residence this afternoon. My throat went dry. Missing person? I forced my voice into calmness. I am sorry, officer. I don't know anyone by that name. There was a pause. Our records indicate she was at your address for Christmas dinner. Her son filed the report when she didn't come home or answer her phone. Her son. I nearly dropped the receiver. Margaret had paraded herself as a lonely widow, a woman with no one in the world except us. Yet somewhere out there, she had a son, one who cared enough to call the police when she didn't check in. Well, yes, we did have dinner, I admitted carefully. But she left with my son and daughter-in-law a few hours ago. They took her out to drive her new car. A new car? Officer Miller asked. Surprised. Yes, an Audi. My son gave it to her today as a Christmas present. I let the absurdity of that sink in for both of us. When I hung up, my hand shook. Margaret had a son, and he hadn't just filed a report, had left 23 missed calls on her phone. All from a name that now glared up at me from the glowing screen, Victor Chen. Message after message lit up. Mom, where are you? Please call me back. The police are looking for you. I am worried. I sat down heavily in my late husband's recliner, my chest tightening. My own son had barely glanced back when he left me alone in this house. Meanwhile, Margaret had a child who panicked after just a few hours without hearing from her. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, I opened her phone's photo gallery. At first, the images seemed harmless. Margaret smiling between Daniel and Clara at our Labor Day cookout. Margaret cutting cake at Clara's birthday. Margaret clinking glasses at Thanksgiving. But then I scrolled further. Screenshots of property records. Photos of my marriage license. My husband's death certificate. And then the photo that made my stomach drop my Social Security card. I kept that locked in a jewelry box upstairs. She had no business even knowing where it was. A cold realization spread through me. Margaret wasn't just playing stepmother. She had been documenting my life, piece by piece, for months. And now I needed to know why. I barely slept that night. The documents, the photos, the frantic messages from Victor Chen, all of it swirled in my head like a storm that wouldn't break. By dawn, it brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Margaret's purse open in front of me. Every item catalogued like evidence. Curiosity burned hotter than fear. Who exactly was Margaret Chen? I powered up my old laptop and began searching. It didn't take long. A few keystrokes later, I found Victor Chen's professional profile. He wasn't just any lawyer. He specialized in elder fraud cases, prosecuting people who tricked seniors into giving away their assets. Irony so thick I could choke on it. The woman parading as a lonely widow had raised a man who spent his career putting con artists behind bars. So why was she here, inserting herself into my family, eyeing my home, photographing my documents? The next breadcrumb came from a public records database. My address, typed in casually, brought up something that made my blood run cold. An appraisal, dated 3 months earlier. Value, $520,000. The requester? Daniel Hayes. My son. I pushed my chair back, heart pounding. Why would Daniel order an appraisal on my home without telling me? I called the company, slipping into my sweetest grandmotherly voice. Hello. This is Eleanor Hayes on Maple Drive. I think I misplaced some paperwork about an appraisal done in October. Could you remind me who authorized it? A woman on the other end tapped her keyboard. Yes. Mrs. Hayes. Ordered by Daniel Hayes for estate planning purposes. He was listed as your power of attorney. My fingers tightened around the phone. Power of attorney? Yes, ma'am. He provided all required documentation. I ended the call with a polite thank you and sat frozen in my chair. I had never given Daniel power of attorney. I knew what that meant. Whoever filed those documents had forged my signature. Shaking, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Margaret O'Donnell had handled my husband's will years ago. If anything official existed, she would know. When I explained, Margaret's expression grew grim. Eleanor, I never prepared any power of attorney for you. You told me explicitly you wanted to keep control of your affairs. She turned her screen toward me. But 3 weeks ago, someone filed this. I stared at the digital copy. My name, my supposed signature, a notary stamp, only it wasn't mine. The loop of the Y in Hayes was wrong. My dots were never circles. It was a clever forgery, but not clever enough. And now I knew. Margaret Chen wasn't circling me by accident. She was moving in for the kill. By the time Daniel and Clara showed up at my door 2 days later, I was ready. They came dressed like they were heading to a meeting, not visiting family. Daniel in his stiff gray suit, Clara in a pencil skirt and silk blouse, her hair perfectly smoothed into a bun. They sat across from me at my kitchen table as if we were strangers negotiating a contract. Mom, Daniel began, his tone measured. We need to talk about what happened with Margaret's purse. I folded my hands and waited. She was very upset, Clara chimed in, leaning forward. She feels like you violated her privacy. She trusted you, and you went through her things. I let out a small laugh. Privacy? She left her purse on my counter. What was I supposed to do? Ignore it? For all I knew, her medication needed refrigeration. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not the point. The point is, you asked her some very uncomfortable questions about her finances and her son. You made her feel interrogated. I simply asked where her son lived, I replied. Apparently, the police already knew. They called me when he reported her missing. That made them both flinch. Clara's eyes flicked toward Daniel, who cleared his throat. Mom, Margaret's relationship with her son is complicated. He worries too much. That's why she doesn't like to talk about him. I leaned back, studying their carefully rehearsed faces. Complicated. Is it interesting? Considering he calls her daily. Did you know that? She's not estranged at all. In fact, she's loved. For a moment, silence stretched thin between us. Finally, Daniel snapped. Mom, Margaret has been there for us in ways you haven't. She's supportive. She helps with our plans. She's like family. There it was, the knife, twisted without hesitation. In ways I haven't? I asked softly, my voice trembling more from fury than sadness. Did I not raise you? Did I not pay for your college? Your wedding? Your first home? And now you want to tell me a woman who's been around 8 months deserves a $60,000 car while I get $5 in a piggy bank? Clara's face flushed, but Daniel pressed on. The gift was symbolic. You always said saving mattered. Yes, I said coldly, but I never said my worth was $5. I stood and walked to the window, my hands gripping the frame. Tell me, Daniel, how did you afford that Audi? Was it from your promotion, the one your company never confirmed? Daniel froze. Clara's hand went straight to her wedding ring, a tell I recognized. And in that silence, the truth began to leak through their polished lies. 2 mornings later, the phone rang just after I poured my first cup of coffee. Margaret's voice came through the line, sweet as honey, as if nothing had happened. Eleanor, dear, I hope you're feeling better. I was thinking maybe we should talk just the two of us, woman to woman. Her tone was smooth, rehearsed. I almost laughed. She wasn't calling out of concern. She was calling to gauge how much I knew. Of course, I said lightly. Why don't you come over this afternoon? There was a pause before she answered. Actually, I thought perhaps somewhere neutral. That little cafe downtown at 2 o'clock. Wouldn't that be nice? Neutral. A place where she could control the setting. Perfect, I told her. I'll see you then. The cafe smelled of espresso and cinnamon when I walked in. Margaret was already there, positioned at a corner table with her back to the wall, giving her a clear view of the entire room. She stood to greet me, dressed in an expensive silk blouse, her silver hair gleaming under the warm lights. Darling, you look lovely, she said, kissing the air near my cheek. I am so glad we're doing this. We made small talk at first about the weather, about Daniel's generosity, about her wonderful new car. But then her expression shifted, her voice dropping into that careful, persuasive register. Eleanor, I know the holidays can bring up feelings. I want you to understand. Daniel and Clara are just worried. And so am I. You've worked so hard. But have you thought about your future? About how to make your assets truly work for you? I tilted my head. My assets? She leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Your house, for example, it's worth so much, just sitting there. You could sell it to an investment group I work with, then lease it back at a very manageable rate. That would free up hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money you could invest in tax-advantaged strategies. Money that would grow instead of gather dust in bricks and mortar. I widened my eyes like a naive widow. Sell my house and rent it back? Is that legal? Completely legal when done properly, she assured me, squeezing my hand. I've helped many seniors transition their assets this way. Daniel and Clara are very excited about it. So there it was, the real plan. Hand my house to her mysterious group and pay them to let me stay. I smiled sweetly, hiding the recorder running inside my purse. Well, Margaret, that's certainly a lot to think about. Her eyes gleamed. Don't think too long, dear. Opportunities like this don't last forever. I left the cafe with a calm smile, but inside I was shaking with fury. She had just confessed to everything. That night, I called Daniel and Clara over. I told them to come alone. No, Margaret. No excuses. They arrived looking wary, as if they expected another lecture. Clara's eyes were puffy from crying. Daniel looked like he hadn't slept in days. I led them into the living room, where the coffee table was covered with papers I had been working on all afternoon. Not Margaret's papers, my own. Fake bank statements. Fabricated investment reports. A stack of documents that painted me as wealthier than I really was. Daniel frowned. Mom, what is all this? I met his gaze. Evident. And bait. Clara shifted uneasily. Bait for what? For Margaret, I said. She's running a con. And you two have been pawns. Maybe willing pawns. But pawns all the same. She's been grooming you. Just like she tried to groom me. But now, we're going to turn the tables. Daniel's face flushed. Mom, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I cut him off. I understand that you and Clara are drowning in debt. I understand that Margaret dangled a lifeline and told you to prove your loyalty by buying her that Audi. And I understand that you've been too desperate to see the truth. She doesn't want to help you. She wants to strip this family bare. Clara pressed her hands together, whispering, God, I knew it. I felt it, but I didn't want to admit it. I softened my tone. Listen to me. You're not the first people she's done this to. And unless we stop her, you won't be the last. But stopping her means playing smarter than she expects. That's where these come in. I pushed the fake bank statements toward them. Numbers inflated to suggest I was worth nearly $2 million. Daniel's eyes widened. Mom, you don't have that kind of money. Exactly, I said. But Margaret doesn't know that. She thinks she's dealing with a foolish old woman, too sentimental to guard her fortune. We're going to let her believe it. She'll get greedy. And when she does, she'll slip. And when she slips, I'll have everything recorded. Clara glanced at the recorder on the table. Realization dawning. You've already started, haven't you? I smiled. Every conversation since Christmas. Every suggestion. Every lie. By the time we're finished, Margaret won't just be exposed, she'll be finished. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom, are you sure about this? I leaned forward, my voice steady. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And for the first time in months, I saw it in their eyes, not pity, not doubt, hope. Friday afternoon, the three of us walked into Margaret's condo like lambs to slaughter. But this time, the slaughter wasn't ours. Her living room looked more like a boardroom than a home charts on easels. Binders on the coffee table. Fresh flowers arranged like props. She greeted us in a silk blouse. Diamonds flashing at her wrists. Eleanor, darling, she said, her voice dripping with triumph. I am thrilled you've decided to move forward. You won't regret this. I smiled warmly, lowering myself into a chair that felt like sitting on cold stone. Before we begin, I'd like to meet your investment partners. You know me. Old-fashioned. I prefer to look someone in the eye before I sign my life away. Her smile faltered for a second before she smoothed it over. Oh, they were called away on urgent business with another client. But not to worry, I have all their credentials here. She slid a glossy folder toward me. I tapped it but didn't open it. Interesting. But I've had my accountant look into my assets. Turns out I am sitting on close to $2 million. I pulled out the fake bank statements and laid them across her coffee table. Her eyes nearly popped out of her head. She snatched up the papers, scanning the numbers, her breathing quickening. My goodness, Eleanor, I had no idea you were in such a strong position. With funds like these, we could expand into far more aggressive strategies, international markets, offshore accounts. You'd be making returns beyond your wildest dreams. Offshore? I asked, blinking innocently. Completely legal, she assured me quickly, when structured properly. Of course. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, playing his part. Mom, maybe this is too much. No. Margaret cut in, eager, almost frantic. This is the perfect time. We need to act fast before the market shifts. I leaned back and folded my hands. Funny you should say that. Because when I called my attorney, she mentioned your son, Victor. Brilliant man. Apparently, has made quite the name for himself prosecuting elder fraud. The color drained from her face. I pulled my phone from my purse and pressed stop on the recorder. The silence in the room was heavy. Every word you've said today, Margaret, is on record. Every promise, every illegal scheme, along with the forged power of attorney and the appraisal you arranged without my consent. Her hands trembled. You can't prove anything. Oh, I can, I said softly, and the police will be very interested in hearing it. Daniel stood then, his voice breaking. You used us. Margaret, you used all of us. Clara's eyes were wet with fury. And you nearly destroyed this family. For the first time, Margaret's mask cracked completely. She sank back into her chair, the queen dethroned, and I knew the game was finally over. When I look back on everything, I realized the Audi with its red bow was never really the insult. The true wound came from being underestimated, from watching people I loved believe I was weak enough to be used. But here's the lesson. You don't measure a person's worth in gifts or bank accounts. You measure it in the strength they carry when everything is on the line. I could have stayed silent, swallowed my $5, and let them strip me of everything. Instead, I fought back with patience, with evidence, and with truth. And that made all the difference. So to anyone listening, remember this. Love without respect is just manipulation, dressed in pretty words. Guard your dignity as fiercely as your home. Because in the end, it isn't wealth or property that defines us, it's the courage to demand the respect we deserve.